Serrano, c'est votre deuxième exposition à la galerie Obadia ici à Bruxelles. Can you tell us about the subject of this exhibition and your travel in Cuba?
Well, it's called Cuba, and I had never been to Cuba before. I did this work about a year and a half ago, and although my mother had been raised in Cuba, she was born in the States, but she was raised in Cuba. And when she went back to the States in 1947, 48, she didn't speak any English, and so I was born in New York City and had to learn Spanish from an early age, But even though Cuba was, part of my, part of my life in some way, it was a distant part because I had never been there. And so when I went to Cuba, I went to discover it as an artist more than anything.
All right. What was your first impression on this travel?
Well, my first impression when I got to Havana was that, I had stepped back in time to 1940s, 1950s, because Cuba is sort of stuck in the past and you feel it immediately. And so I felt both at home and, because I was, I speak Spanish, particularly Cuban Spanish, but at the same time I realized I'm not from there, and so there's a distance. So I'm both, an insider and outsider at the same time.
Right. You have been describing you as a painter. Mm-hmm. So I was wondering about the portrait you did. How do you choose the people you want to?
Well, I've always seen myself as an artist with a camera rather than as a photographer, because I did study painting and sculpture in art school. But basically, when I went to Cuba, I was open to doing anything I could do.
So you took pictures of the faces and then pictures of the houses of the same people?
No, sometimes I took pictures of faces, sometimes or portraits. Sometimes I took pictures of their homes. Sometimes I didn't take pictures of them, but of their homes. I took a lot of interiors. It was very interesting for me to do interiors.
So in a way, you are making a portrait of Cuba?
Absolutely. I'm making a very broad and general portrait of Cuba. Now, you might ask, whose Cuba is this? Of course, it's my Cuba. It's completely subjective. Mm-hmm. It's what I chose to photograph. It's what I found interesting. And so, it's in a way a documentation, but it's also different because it's a very specific work on Cuba.
So, and then what is your intention?
My intention was to talk about Cuba. I feel like America especially has shut down Cuba intentionally and very tragically. When I was a kid, the communists, the Russians were the bad guys, the Chinese were the bad guys. Now, more than 50 years later, Chinese are no longer the threat. Russia is no longer the enemy, but now Cuba is still the enemy, and we punish this country, in a very inhuman way. I mean, can you imagine? I can't imagine a country being boycotted for more than 50 years because of, resentment for one figure, meaning Fidel Castro, and it's like Fidel Castro has to die before they can open up a dialogue about, what Cuba is and how it should be treated fairly. And so I think of it as a human rights project, really. I'm not a crusader, but I think it's inhuman what America's done to Cuba. Well, yes, it's true. Many times I treat my subjects as if I were painting them. I try to make it look like painting. Sometimes I feel very good when collectors of mine refer to my photographs as paintings. They forget that they're photographs and call them paintings. And, it's because I've always seen myself as an artist rather than as a photographer that it's important for me to view these as works of art rather than photographs.
So it would be the composition?
It would be the composition, it would be the content, it would be the execution, and most of all, the concept. A lot of the times my work is very conceptual. I have always seen myself as an artist a conceptual artist with a camera more than anything else.
So there are a lot of thinking before working?
Yeah, that's thinking before working, absolutely.
So have you been walking a lot in Cuba before working? Did you walk for a few weeks or?
No, when I got there, someone asked me, do you want to go out and investigate the such and such a place? And I said, I don't investigate. When I go out with my camera. Because, when you're an artist, you see pictures everywhere, and it's stupid to go somewhere without your camera.
So the subject comes to you?
The subject comes to me, and very easily. When I have a camera, I see pictures everywhere.
So you just have to walk and let the subjects invite you.
Absolutely, they invite me, they find me, they present themselves in a way that I see them. It's interesting because they're Cubans, they live in Cuba, but she's actually Russian and he's Israeli, and but I think she's been in Cuba since she was a child. Maybe she was even born in Cuba, I'm not sure, but I know she speaks Russian, he speaks Hebrew. And they're a very nice couple. They have a child. And, this is what I would consider the upper middle class of Cuba. They have a nice home. He has a business in Israel. In fact, I was in Jerusalem yesterday, and he drove me to the airport. He happened to be in Israel at the same time that I was there. But, I think of this as a very natural photograph, but it's staged in the sense that I purposely had them pose for me. It's 7 o'clock in the morning. We have lights. It's a setup, but at the same time, it's a very natural setup. And I think a lot of my work, the best work is like that. It's sort of staged and natural and real at the same time. Yeah, I see it as three individuals who, even though they're a family, they all have their own identity, they all have their own worlds, and yet they coexist. And I think that's the best kind of family there is, the family that allows each member to be themselves. In Cuba, I was also interested in death, and I went to a funeral parlor late at night, and this man had just died. I didn't know him. But fortunately, I was able to get the permission of the son to photograph him. Even though some of the other members didn't want me to photograph the man, the son gave me the permission. And so I photographed him. He's in a glass case. When people die, they usually have a wake or funeral for a very short time. And then they bury them quickly because it's hot there, and so the bodies will decompose. And I was very fortunate to be able to photograph this man. And I think, there's a lot of dignity in this portrait. And again, I didn't know him. I only know, and with all my work, with all my photographs, I usually don't know the people. I don't know them at all, and so I don't know him, but through the photograph, I get to know him, and I get to discover him and feel him the same way the audience does when they look at him. And, I think to me he's a very elegant man, a very dignified man who died with friends and family, and was beloved by the people surrounding him.
We can also look at him as a sort of a mask. And in lots of your portraits, we see a sort of mask of something that is disharmonious, but in the same time beautiful.
Well, I think people wear masks, whether they're alive or dead. They all wear masks, And I remember T.S. Eliot poem where he talked about the mask we put on to meet the faces that we meet, or the face that we put on to meet the faces that we meet. Meaning we have a different face for different people, for different times in life and in death.
But
I see beauty, or the ability to create beauty, in almost anything I see. I've even taken pictures of shit, because I thought I could make it beautiful, very abstract, very elegant images, and if you didn't know it was shit, you wouldn't know what you were looking at. And so I find beauty where, people think there's no beauty. I find it, I did that in the morgue, I did that with the Ku Klux Klan, I've done that with homeless people, and so, I find beauty everywhere I go, and I try, as an artist, I try to, if I don't see it, I try to create it for myself and for my audience.